Design Center, where we look at different applications on the power architecture. And yeah, ULIS, the research center, has also a strong neuroscience community. And yeah, there is a connection. We have a special division at the Supercomputing Center where we try to consult or to work together with the neuroscience community to get them on HPC machines. And that's kind of what I'm trying to tell you about today. First, though, a bit of history of brain research. So the pace kind of accelerated with research always. So it started, I think the first things people found is that the Egyptians already knew something about the brain because they put holes in their heads when they had like very strong headaches. And yeah, so that's quite coarse, but already some knowledge there. Then in the 17th century, it was found out that like the thoughts actually happen in the brain and not in the heart, which is kind of crazy to think that someone would think that. But yeah, and Thomas Willis is a person of that age who made an impact when visualizing first things of the brain. This picture is actually from one of the books he put out. Then in the 19th century, there is, I would say, important became visualization, where Cajal, based on a method of Gordy, was able to stain different brains and could actually visualize the fibers in there. And that's, yeah, 19th century, but you will see that's still something which is super interesting right now. And also, it was the time, the neuron doctrine, when people started figuring out that a neuron is probably the smallest or a very important entity in the brain, which is responsible for a lot of things. Then also important in the context of the presentation that in the late 19th century, when electricity came up everywhere, it was also found out that the brain is working on electricity now. And then, yeah, at the beginning of the 20th century, Workman areas were defined. This is in the brain, special or specific areas which are responsible for doing stuff like moving, thinking, that kind of. Also important, the Hodgkin-Huxley model in 1952, which actually found out that the whole fibers and neurons in the brain could be described as a set of cables with special conductance and resistance, and so it's kind of a circuit in your body. And that is also how neuroscience began. So today you could think that, okay, we know a lot about that, that is also true, but it's still a long way off until we fully decode the brain. Things we need to do for that is that we create an atlas in high resolution, and the models which describe how this atlas works and also work when something is firing, so how does what impact what else. So this is a very large scale effort. The challenges today are that you have a lot of neurons in your brain, 10 to the power of 11, and each single neuron might have 10 to the power of 4 connections to other neurons. So you end up with a lot of possible connections, a lot of paths you need to go if you transmit your signals. The brain is a multi-scale machine. You have reactions which happen on the molecular level. You have cells talking to each other. You have individual brain regions which do stuff which you can only understand when you look at it in the whole. And then you have even the whole system, like how is the brain in the body and how does it work. The brain has a lot of things and it does it very power efficiently. The whole human brain works on 30 watts. If you look at how much energy we spend right now to simulate just a small piece of the brain in the supercomputer, this is really amazing. And also, I put on here a complex data collection because it's not trivial to collect the data. When you have a living brain, you cannot really go through that. You need some methods to look at it from outside. And when you have a brain which you can actually study in detail, then you lose the dynamics of what happens when you excited it at some point. So it's kind of complex. Because it's so complex, there is a large effort in Europe which tries to study the human brain. It's called the Human Brain Project, HPP. It's a €1 billion endeavor, funded 50% by the European Commission and 50% 80% by participants of that. It's not at all 2013, and it's going to work for more or less 10 years. It's a flagship project in the future and emerging technologies part, and it has it's structured in 12 sub-projects, looking at different things like how does the mouse brain compare to the human brain, how can you mimic the computing of a human brain in a computer, which is morphological computing. And yeah, there's also the sub-project 7, which is HPC, so that is where we are kind of working in. The goal eventually is to build an integrated information communication infrastructure to enable global collaborative efforts to understand the human brain and eventually also emulate the capabilities. So there's much more, and I think every sub-project has their own interesting stuff. If you want to learn more about that, go to that webpage. Yeah, then you already have heard about the pilot system, but I'd like to step back a bit before that. So the simulations we're doing right now are kind of computational intensive, and that's why we have a high performance and analytics and computing platform, HPAC, where we are bundling different supercomputing centers all over Europe. It's the largest supercomputing centers there are, to work together on that. So that's Barcelona, it's Sinica and CSCS and JDC. Also there are cloud services at another German research center at KIT, and yeah, visualization at RWTH and EPFL universities. So then we have like a common structure where you can run your simulations on, and eventually that should become federated so that you can just launch a job and then it's somewhere. But this effort to simulate the brain will only get more computational intensive when the future comes. So eventually you will end up with whole petaflops being used for computations and whole petabytes to save your data or to read your data. So you need the actual capability of a whole supercomputer, and when this runs, you might even fill up the computer for an extended amount of time. So it makes sense to formulate some requirements which a supercomputer would need to match this criterion of the HPP that it can run there on a large scale. Those requirements are that we want to have interactive and scalable visualization in situ. You have a large memory footprint of the data because you have a lot of scans on the practical experimental side, but you also have large simulation sets if you simulate the model of the brain. So you kind of need something to cope with that, and that's dense memory or and fast interconnect. Also for the interactive part, you need dynamic resource management and to interactively steer maybe jobs where the data is or jobs where other jobs are running. And you have, by the nature of this large project, various data sources so that you eventually want to have a federated system to access your data.
Andreas, is this workload more of a capability task in the sense of tightly integrated simulations, or is it more of a capacity or high throughput task? Are grid resources an option?
Dirk, I don't know.
It depends a bit. I mean, if you were looking at the for simulations, that is more capability, because if you want to scale to very large networks, then you actually have to scale down to very large systems, because of kind of if it's about saying more data analysis, that's what more super.
So you have both?
Yes.
I think this is also what the cloud services and the visualization services are kind of looking towards too. So anyway, we have now the special requirements, and that was then they were built into systems by a European Commission system called pre-commercial procurement, where we can state those requirements and then have vendors apply with their solutions to that. And two of those have been set up in Munich. They're called Julia and Juran. They look like that. So Theo also mentioned that already shortly. On the left side is Julia, on the right side is Juran. Left side is a crane system with a 60-on-5 KNL in it, and connected with an omnipath network. On the right side is our Minsky server, so I think it's a third of Summit Dev, more or less, with InfiniBand and NVMe SS. Then in the middle there is a common local storage. Both Joule and Duron are connected to our large-scale GPFS, which connects all the supercomputer units. But they have now, in addition to that, a faster common local storage in the middle. So you can, with the two technologies like KNL and Power8 Prime plus NVIDIA, access the same data very quickly. Yeah, this is just the setup. I don't think there is anything more interesting on here. Yeah, we have 4 dedicated visualization nodes which have a faster interconnect to the outside. The rest you can only access through the administration node. The name Duron is actually Duron. Joule equals neuron. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd like to start now focusing on the application running there, and we had a lot of contact to those applications at a GPU hackathon in Munich. So at the beginning of this year, in March, we hosted what we called the EuroHack. It's 1 week of application porting to GPUs. In our institute, where we had 10 teams, in total 60 scientists there. So 10 teams, and each of those teams had 2 experts, mentors assigned to them. And Till was one of the team which was there. There were also 3 neuroscientific applications, Arbor, TVB, HPC, and the PLI guys. Arbor is, I will talk later about that. In total, we launched over 1,000 jobs. We opened up Eureka, which is our production supercomputer, and we opened up Duron. And 2/3 chose to run on Duron, and they were doing that successfully. So that showed us that this is a machine where we actually can do stuff on. And also I think from the team's point of view, every team came out better than they come in. So they were really motivated and were able to accelerate the code on the machines. So then it's looking at the application. So you have a diverse set of applications, and I try to sort them here a bit, but I probably forgot something. So you have a lot of simulation applications which go through the different scales of the brain. So you have regions, an app called the Virtual Brain tries to look at the coarse regions which are actually doing functional stuff in your brain. And you have neural networks where you actually simulate each and every neuron and then make large spiking networks going through that. And then you zoom in one level more, where you actually give to the neuron some structure, what they call compartments, so something inside. And this is Arbor or neuron. Then you for sure need also to measure your data. So how to connect different kind of sources, or how to have a look at the fiber, which there are. This is not necessarily an HPC part at the moment, but it's nevertheless quite computational intensive. And then there is post-processing, so you measure the data, which we also do in Unity, and then you need to post-process that to improve the quality, to combine that. And there is really a lot to do, and I will show one thing. What I will focus on is the virtual brain, Arbor, and at the post-processing point, the ICA application, which also are the ones which have been to the hackathon, because I knew the people and I could talk to them. So TVB, HPC. The first part, TVB, stands for the virtual brain. So this is a framework to simulate brain dynamics on a coarser, larger scale. It works with a biologically realistic connectivity matrix. That's what you see in those pictures here. So you this is called the connectome, where scientists actually found out how one of these coarse regions is connected with the other. Yeah. Those regions then are called neural mass models, and actually those are just sparse matrices which have some parameters, or the solutions have some parameters ranging from 60 to 1000. So already there is some scale in there. And they have 3 parameters which you can simulate very well. And usually it works like you phonate or you measure something in your MRI, and then with this clinical data, you build your model on top of that, so that you have a matching model of a patient, which you then can try to cure the illness. The current software stack is a Python simulation core, which is expandable by specialized MATLAB scripts, because that's how the community works. So you have always some MATLAB mixture inside, and then the actual front end for the scientist or for the doctor even who wants to use this is a web-based visual control center where they then can put in some domain-specific language to describe their model and have that then shown to them as fast as possible. So this doesn't include any GPU at this stage, but it's anyway running on Drone. So this is an application, the virtual epileptic patient, where people of that group try to analyze what means epileptic from a brain point of view. So this is running on Drone. It's a single-threaded application, so it's nothing special about that, but it's working and they are in active usage of that. I think more interesting for our HPC side is TVB HPC, where they use this serial approach of TVB, but make that parallel. And they decided not to change the code per se, but to make the parameters which you want to simulate the brain model in. That is the level of parallelism now. And they have been to the GPU hackathon. They hadn't done any GPU acceleration before for this code, and went out with a 20-fold speed up in the end. So they studied the data accesses with the people who were there. They fixed that or improved that and learned all those GPU techniques. Right now on Drone they have this running, and they have very CUDA optimized version of a simple model. They tell me it's called Kuramoto model as a proof of concept. So that's really using that. Since then I kind of shifted focus, and because that's interesting, I wanted to mention that as well. So they made automated code generation, and how they are doing it. So they have this DSL, this domain-specific language, where a scientist can easily, without knowing programming, define their model, which is usually the neural mass model. They can then either plug in already existing other parts being coupling kernel, integration kernel, all the post-processing step, or they can even write that then. And then, based on this DSL, they will generate parallel code, or parameter parallel code, or a pre-step of that. And that backends to CUDA and see a number and see. And what they use for that is Loopy. I'm always showing you that conversation. They have Loopy, which is a Python package, and I will show you a code snippet in a minute. It interfaces to Number, which is another Python package, which just-in-time compiles Python code, and it can target either CPU or GPU. And here now is a comparison on the right side. The speed up of using just the plain CPU version of Number, or Number targeting the NVIDIA GPU, and they end up with a speed up of 15-fold here. And that's not on Neuron, but on Eureka, our large-scale system with Haswell CPUs and NVIDIA K80s. So how this then looks, so Loopy generates different kind of code, and from that, based on Number, then takes over and JIT compiles that. But you can already see that Loopy does some work here, because if you compare that, you will see that on the right side where the GPU code is kind of prepared, you have like the typical indices you use when you're doing with GPU, like thread index or block index. So that Loopy is already aware that you're targeting the GPU and will produce optimized code from that. Yeah, so this is their current work, and they are successful with that. They try to shield the researcher, the doctor, as far away from the HPC part of it as possible. Next application is Arbor. So while TVB is kind of a large-scale effort where you look at different at-home regions, it's like effective models. There is other applications which go deeper. Nest is one I already told you before. It's biologically correct, so they kind of look like how is it working, but you would assume that neurons are point-line. And with that you can simplify things, but you can also create very large networks. Arbor goes one level deeper, where the neurons have internal structure. And they are using this Hodgkin-Huxley model and look at neurons as a circuit. Then the neuron has axons and dendrites and synapses which are connecting, so this is then a proper brain in the computer. Because this is a circuit, you can actually use a lot of electrical engineering knowledge there and have those cables modeled with partial differential equations, so that in the end you end up with a very large matrix which couples different neurons with others. It's kind of a band matrix, as I understand, so most of the entries are on the main diagonal, but because sometimes there are different connections, it's not the whole main matrix. So that kind of complicates the memory access pattern. The aim of, or features of Arbor is that it wants to make in real time, or at least close to real time, and morphologically detailed large-scale simulations possible. It's a new project, so it's not around very long. It's optimized for HPC systems, because the other neuron simulators are older, 20 years old, and they have not been programmed with parallel systems in mind. So they started over fresh. This should be easy to integrate and easy to extend by using APIs throughout the system, and it's in collaboration of JC, CSCS, and ESC. It's developed on GitHub with all the perks of open source modern software. They have different backends, or let's go one step before. For communication, they use MPI to distribute across different nodes, and then local for node, they use either thread building blocks or C++ threads. On the CPU, data is usually packaged, so that the chunk of data which you need to process soon is close together. Then that is offloaded to an accelerator. They have backends for CUDA, for AVX512, so for the KNL more or less, and AVX2 for a main-core machine, multi-core machine, sorry. And then there on the accelerator, stuff is processed, and when it's done, it's again put back to the CPU, which then tries to figure out what it needs to send where and repackage that. So they already came to the hackathon with the GPU backend available, but they optimized with help from guys from NVIDIA very much the sparse matrix computation and introduced some overheads by padding their sparse metrics, but with that they sped up their code from 3 to 10-fold more. The current status is it's running quite well. It scales strongly and weakly Polarized. This plot here is also not for Arbor because they generated it in CSCS on PISC8, but this is also P100, so it should be basically the same. They are still working. So if you look at the blue curve, this is the KNL, I think, and the red curve is the GPU implementation. MC is a multi-core system. Then you see that the GPU is faster, but it could be a lot faster, but this is the overhead which is generated by packaging the data into the large sets which you need to make the GPU working. So they are still figuring out solutions to make that faster. The GPU acceleration mainly focuses on a specialized metric solver, and they even went further, so that they made a special optimization target to GPUs. So instead of updating different states in the matrices with atomics, which you would do naively in CUDA, they implemented a warp level reduced by key feature. So with that, they were able to increase the runtime there. Neural is in use, but they don't have had time yet to make any dedicated measurements. Okay, the last application I'd like to show you It's PLI ICA. So first, what is PLI? PLI stands for Polarized Light Imaging. And there, an institute in Munich captures brain slices under polarized light. Those slices are then captured under different angles. So the angle between the polarization plane of the light and the image is changed 80 times, so between 0 and 130 degrees. And what happens then is that the myelin around the axons reflects light differently, so depending on the inclination of the incoming light, or of the polarization plane. And then you capture different things, and in the computer you can then use that to get a 3D image of your brain slices, and eventually of your whole brain. So this is some pictures of how that looks. Problem is that this capturing is a sophisticated process, and there is always some admixture in, some noise or some artifacts. And the ICA is the part which can get rid of that. This is an independent component analysis, which is a signal processing method where you have a signal which is a combination of a lot of sources which combine into one. And by making different measurements of the same large signal, you can actually separate the individual contributions to that signal. The basis is the sinusoidal distribution of the brain light you measure when you move it through the polarized light plane, and then through this ICA you can because you're doing 18 measurements, you can create 18 components of that. And one of those components is then your signal, and this should follow a sinusoidal function. And as you can see here, this is actually the case. So the points which you measure here are actually lying on the sinusoidal function, and here the relative difference is shown. And it perfectly fits. One other component, in this case 16, is some noise, which is being measured. And here the measurement doesn't fit anymore to this sinus function, and then you know this is not a signal I'd like to take because this probably comes from some dust or something. And this is what ICA does. So it separates your large mixed signal into parts, and most of those are probably not your brain you want to capture. So it's the ICA analysis is a computational intensive analysis because you need to crunch a lot of numbers, and you're operating on large data per brain slice. You need about 700 gigabytes, which adds up to a lot, like 300 terabytes per brain. This is because you have high quality scans and you have different planes you look at. So it's always 18 pictures per slide. The code is written in Python, which has a single part, or had a single part in Python, and the rest with the usual NumPy SciPy stack. It's around for some time, so I would consider this legacy code because the person who wrote that and knows the most about that isn't at the institute anymore. And so with that, the current master student came to the hackathon, and he was actually in my team. And what we did there, we extracted the compute-intensive part to C, to then eventually in the next step accelerate them with OpenACC and CUDA. And this is what's shown here. So on the right side, this is what we started off with, is Stubs Petrolus function. So this is just basically one-liner coming out of SciPy, so very nice. We needed to get rid of that to accelerate that, and we made a C prototype here, and then we appended that with OpenACC in the case. So we made this prototype-like development because the whole program was too large to start with. We made interfaces and we prepared that, but a week, although it's a lot of hours, it doesn't suffice to do that. In the end, we had a kind of sophisticated hybrid code with Python, C, OpenACC, and CUDA, looking like this. And we ran that on Duron and Jureka, and we found out that data transfers, Duron were 10 times faster getting data to the device, or 6 times faster getting data from the device. And also computing was 7 times faster. The holdup was then that still many times of the many parts of the program are in Python. So we just extracted the most computer-intensive part, but there is still a lot of stuff. So this is limiting the speed up, because the speed up of the whole program was, I think, only 40%. Yeah, but I think that the benefit actually is not the raw speed up again, but you, as a researcher, as a scientist, at least that's what I understand from talking to my group, is that you can speak to a lot of people and do like the stuff you were maybe afraid to tackle because you don't know how it works, and you can just talk to the people at this hackathon. Just before the talk, I spoke to them again, and unfortunately they wrote back to their serial version because they had, during this parallelization, they found out that the MPI is actually not working properly, so they wrote back to the serial version to fix their communication errors. Yeah, there is more happening on Bureau. I only highlighted 3, but there is especially with imaging, like capturing data, sorting through that, happening a lot. Also, a lot of deep learning is coming up, where on the right side here, Fahad, a colleague, is using deep learning to discriminate the foreground from the background, so to find out where actually different parts of the brain are scanned and where the background is. So he wants to create a mask. And he's doing that with deep learning, and for that we're also looking into containers right now, so we're starting with singularity. So there's lots of stuff happening, lots of interesting things on this Minsky server. Yeah, and that's, brain research is exciting also from a computational science point of view, because there is a lot of demands which we can match. I think it's about 2 years since Euron is around. The system is under intensive use, and not only by HPP users, although I just showed you that right now. We have 2 applications, which I kind of highlighted, and many others also benefit from the NVLink. I think for the applications I showed you, only for the ICA, the NVLink was important. But anyway, the HPP helps to drive the development of future supercomputers by looking at different architecture and how they can fit to their use. And that's it. Thank you.
Questions or comments, Andreas?
So I have actually a very general one, because I understand that, and also the group here is more interested in speeding up, just using GPUs or some other solutions. But for example, the method like independent component analysis, like you said, it's computation very expensive. Are you also working on just trying to look at different algorithms that can do the same kind of signal separation process?
I would, so with you mean me?
The group that you're working with.
Yeah, so that's the point. I would consider that is being their responsibility to find out that, because that's, it's so many fields we are working on. I think that's kind of hard to match that. I hope that they look at all the things which are organized.
It's really like the most expensive
method
that you can use.
All right,
So
I don't know anything
it might be actually a good idea to look at the